Welcome to Serenity is Addictive, where we explore the benefits of 12-step spirituality in depth. Let's get ready to dive in deep into this next episode. Catalina, welcome. Good to see you. How are you?
Good. I'm excited to talk about step 5.
Step 5, baby. Let's do it. You want to read the step?
Sure. It's step 5 says, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And so our listeners may recall that this is obviously step 5 follows step 4, but it builds on the inventory that you took in step 4 of kind of your history of, you know, the good and the bad, all of it together, and kind of just really trying to document who you are. You know, what are all the different facets to who you are and what you've done in your lifetime. And so step 5 is feeding into now it's time that you have that inventory. It's time to share it with your higher power, with ourselves, and with another human being.
Yeah, well said, Catalina. And I love how you... I love to highlight the point that I believe you either said or alluded to, which is we includes positive assets, which we talked about in step 4, but very important. And then thinking about who we're going to share this with, definitely want to have someone who also understands that this is not just beating us up. Matter of fact, it has nothing to do with beating us up, as I believe we talked about in step 4. And the sponsor should be another person, in my opinion, although you can choose a religious leader, you can choose, it's not good to choose a spouse. It's not good to, choose a family member. It definitely should be someone detached. But some of the key elements I think would be good to talk about, Catalina, like what you looked for when you were picking your sponsor, and what I maybe looked for when I was picking sponsors in the different programs I've been involved in, and even thinking about some of the sponsors I have now. What is important to us, one of the things is it's a program of attraction, not promotion. So when I look around the rooms and the people I've met, like who's living a life that I'm attracted to? Is there something about them, qualities, the way they're living their life, that's attractive? How do they treat other people? How do they treat themselves? Do they have something I want? And do they have the experience that they can relate to me without judgment? I don't want someone who's going to beat me up. I don't want someone who's going to reinforce my shame, with the very, 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 very small caveat, meaning if I'm so deluded in self and so crazy and I keep, like, let's say getting arrested and I'm really on the edge of a really terrible things, sometimes those type of people may need a certain kind of hard-ass sponsor. If you're really off the rails, you probably need that for a little bit. And I would say if you have that, that's great to get you sober and, if it's a drug or alcohol. But then you want to also evolve when you go on your journey. But if you're not that far gone, and you probably want someone in the middle who, well, definitely you don't want a people pleaser as a sponsor, right? You don't want someone who's just going to not give you any feedback. And also, like, one of the benefits of sharing your step 5 is we spend a lot of times in our own heads. And even like praying to God, we can pray. It's in our own heads. It's good to put it out there. To even hear ourselves speak it out loud to another person is healing. A safe person with no judgment. And also to have that person, they see things that we can't see. Other people can see things we can't see about ourselves, and we can see things about ourselves that they can't see, and we can see things about them that they can't see. So there's a value in community and having a safe, trusted guide to help us who's been through this process before. Your thoughts, Catalina, on the picking of a sponsor or anything else I touched upon?
Yeah, you touched on a few things.
I know. I went a little crazy there. Too much caffeine.
So, yeah, I mean, I think rewinding a little bit and talking about this concept of kind confession, which I don't like to use that word because I think that people who may have had experience with the Catholic religion think of it in terms of that, which there's a part, it's similar to it, but this concept of step 5 is, I think it's a little bit different because, traditionally you're only talking about, like you said, your mistakes, and step 5 is really more of an inventory of understanding who you are. And often we don't have, I mentioned, I think in step 4, that we don't have a very good understanding of who we really are. And so step 5 is really about teaching us true humility. And some people are scared of that word because they think humility is like the person who just gets, beat up all the time and doesn't have a thing to say about it and takes the lowest position in every situation and stuff. And that's not actually true humility. Humility is really understanding the truth of who you are, not thinking you're better than you are, but also not thinking you're worse than you are. Both of those are just as important as the other. That's no good in thinking that you're worse than you actually are. So it's really about understanding who we are truthfully. And it's just, I thought it would be interesting to bring up that this concept of confessing, past mistakes, this is as old as the dirt. I mean, if you look at the Torah, the Bible, the Quran, all of these different texts actually have, they have references to this type of confession, this version of sharing your wrongs to gain relief from them. It's practiced in the Catholic religion, the Greek Orthodox religion, Protestant religion, Orthodox Judaism, and Islamic faith traditions as well. So it's a pretty wide understood concept. But what I said it before, but what I just love about step 5 is it's not just about admitting your mistakes. There's a portion of that where you're freeing yourself from the guilt that we can take around, and that doing mistakes and not making amends for those mistakes can carry with us. But it's also about seeing our benefits, because it's really often, and I think very common for humanity, that we think unless we're perfect and we'd never made any mistakes, no matter how prideful we look on the outside, I think deep down inside, in fact, I would say the more prideful that we appear on the outside and the more that we peacock to show off how amazing we are, I think typically that means the more insecure we feel truly on the inside, and that our value comes from showing off all these external pieces of ourselves, to make ourselves feel confident. So I think step 5 is so important because it really helps us to see who we really are. The other thing that I wanted to comment on was absolutely about, sharing this with someone. It's so important to pick somebody who is compassionate, who is understanding, who understands the concept of this exercise, whether you're doing it in the context of the 12 steps, or this is something you can be doing outside of the 12 steps. I mean, this is not a new concept. But you need to make sure that you're speaking with someone who understands the purpose of this, because you don't want someone who's going to try to fix you. You don't want someone who's going to try to make excuses for you. You want somebody who's going to be able to listen with compassion and with at least a degree of detachment, so they're not going to take anything that you do or say personally. And so for those reasons, it is highly discouraged to use a spouse or a relative or a best friend, someone who has an emotional attachment to you and to potentially some of the situations that you're going to discuss. You can't be talking to somebody that you feel anything you're going to do or say is going to hurt them, because that's going to limit your likelihood of sharing what you need to share. And so there's actually a quote from Serenity, a companion for 12-step recovery, on this. It says, "Because these areas are so sensitive and so very personal, it is important to exercise care in choosing the person or persons with whom we formally share our 5th step. Such individuals should be trustworthy and somewhat detached from the situations about which we will share." So it's definitely important to pick somebody that emulates those qualities, especially, I think, compassion. nobody's going to be going through a fifth step scenario who needs somebody who's going to be further drilling them down. I mean, this is really an exercise where you've taken all of your armor off and you're really being vulnerable. You need somebody who's going to be really understanding of that vulnerability and really reassuring, because that's part of also where you get the acceptance, where you experience the acceptance of being exactly who you are and that you're good enough being exactly who you are. You don't have to change, right? Like before the fifth step, it's this whole process of we have all these facades and fake pieces to ourselves to make up for what we feel are lacking on the inside. This exercise is literally taking all those off and exposing ourselves for who we are, not just who we really are, but even our past mistakes that have had an impact on who we are today, and having someone express complete acceptance of you with all of that. You know, and so if you have somebody who can't practice that, it's going to defeat the step, you know, it's really important. So yeah, that's what I got.
I love it, Catalina. You explained that really well and you answered my question, which is great. And added a lot of nice, beautiful context to this discussion on step 5. You also remind me, as you usually do in a wonderful way, to give some context and kind of, I said in step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, each step builds upon each other. So maybe it's just good to take a step back and kind of think about what we're doing here. So step 1, admitting that, you know, I'm powerless left to myself, meaning there's so many things in my life which I don't have power over that I think I had power over, but from bumping my head off the wall, I'm learning I don't have power over. And there's so many things in my life left to myself that I can't control and manage, that I thought I could control and manage, but through trial and error I'm seeing I can't control and manage. So life is teaching me something, so I get to a step 1 or a bottom experience or something close to that where I'm realizing I don't have all the answers. Right? That leads me into a step 2. It opens up my ego to say, if I don't have all the answers and my experience is showing me this, step 1. Step 2 says there is a power greater than myself, or powers greater than myself. A community of people who are here to help me is a power greater than myself. But then there's a spiritual power, whether you call it the universe, the sea, the ocean, you know, providence, God, a higher power, that wants to restore my life to sanity, wants to partner with me to help me do all these things that I can't do on myself, or even to do them in a much easier, softer way that's more beneficial for me. So let's say I've come to believe, or I'm coming to believe that even exists. Step 3, I'm making the decision to turn my life and my will over to this power, even if it's one baby step at a time. Step 4, I'm following up on that decision by taking a look, going back to step 1, what are all the areas that are tripping me up? A lot of times it's resentments, it's fears, it's harms. What harms did I do to myself? What harms did I do to others? Where do I keep knocking over and bumping into myself or falling down, or, you know, what's out of control? So I inventory all that, which we discussed in step 4. I get to see where the instincts, which are healthy and good, might be dominating me, or I'm overdoing some instinct. I might be overdoing a natural strength or underdoing a natural strength, which leads to a liability. And I get to write all that out. And then in step 5, I get to share it. But the whole purpose of doing all this is we want to see what's tripping us up so we can be free of that. So we can learn to, let's say there was a natural strength that I'm overusing or underusing. How about if there was a way where I could use it moderately and effectively so now it can stay a strength instead of hurting me to be a liability? And the step 5 and the step 4, hearing another person's perspective on that and experience with that as well is really, really helpful. So the purpose of all these steps is so we can have a happier, more joyful, more free, to be more fully ourselves. It's just a beautiful process that gives us more freedom more interior liberation and freedom. The more we depend on a power greater than ourselves and let go and actually focus on the things we're supposed to focus on, the more we truly become who we really are. So the purpose of this is getting another guide to help us through that, to share their experience, strength, and hope with us and help us to get free. And one of the things, I didn't want to jump to step 6, but I want to give a little payoff to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. So some of the defects we may discover in step 4 and 5 that we share is we want to learn how to change. And I'm going to give some examples. Let's say fear into having faith, right? Hate, if there's any hatred, into learning how to love. Egoism and learning true humility. Humility can also be a synonym for gratitude, right? Humility is a true understanding of what we really are. It is not bashing ourselves at all, but it's not overestimating ourselves, thinking we're better than others or, superior or anything like that. It's just recognizing our gifts, but recognizing we're not God, basically. We want to turn anxiety and worry into serenity, complacency into action, denial into acceptance, jealousy into trust, fantasy into reality, selfishness into service, resentment into forgiveness, judgmentalism into tolerance, despair into hope, self-hate into self-respect and self-love, loneliness into fellowship. So just some examples, and that comes from a book called Drop the Rock, which is on step 6 and 7. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I just want to I want to make the connection of why we're doing this. I hope that helps. Catalina, your thoughts?
No, I think that's really good. I think I could expand a little bit further on some of those points because I think they're really key. And so, there are three parts or 4 parts to this step. The first part is the exact nature of our wrongs. And I think that sometimes people can interpret that to mean like I have to describe every single aspect around the thing that I did wrong. Like the sky was this color, it was this time of day, the facial expression on my husband when I yelled at him was this. Like that's not what it means. The exact nature of our wrongs, it means going back to the root of it. And so it's so important because it's not just meant to be a laundry list of every mistake you've ever made. It's meant to help us understand the root of who we truly are. And so, there's an example of like, maybe you stole some cookies from a store. And so that was the first part that you put there. But you dove in a little bit deeper and said, well, why did I steal those cookies? It's because I had a fear of going hungry and not having enough to eat. Mm-hmm. And so then you explore the fear. Well, what is the fear there? Well, the fear is that, my higher power is not going to provide me with what I need. And so I feel like I have to take control of the situation myself. And so it's really talking about even deeper than that. I think the example goes into like, well, you can look at that also as a positive that maybe this was executed in the wrong way, but you have the willingness to do whatever it takes to make sure that you take care of yourself and your family, right? Like that's not a bad thing. That's a really good positive thing. Now that could be used in the wrong way. Stealing is probably not the best example of that, but the fact that you're willing to do whatever it takes to take care of yourself and your family, that's a positive. And so it's important to focus on that because this is not meant to be a laundry list of every time you did cut somebody off driving to work or things like that. There's more there. And so it's really supposed to, what's the exact nature? What's the deeper story behind that? And then you really start to paint a picture of a human being who in most cases has a lot of qualities that are good, but they might be used in the wrong way. And that takes trial and error to learn that. And it also takes guidance from someone. And we don't always have guidance from someone who knows how to give that, right? Like our parents do the best job that they could. Some are better than others, but none are perfect. And so there's some of the stuff that we have to learn ourselves. The next piece is admitting to God and the importance on that, which I love. There's a quote from How Al-Anon Works that basically says, first we admit that we have learned what we have learned to the God of our understanding. The purpose of this admission is to come clean before God, to allow ourselves to be exactly who we are within this vitally important spiritual relationship. And so it's really getting to the root of having that humility, of really knowing who you are and who you're not, and being okay with that, feeling with your higher power. Because if you can't be at peace with yourself in your relationship with your higher power, you're not going to have luck with any other relationship, in my opinion, because you're dealing with someone who's perfect. If you can't trust that person, that entity accepts you exactly for who you are today, how on earth can you have trust that anybody else who's flawed and imperfect is going to have acceptance for you exactly for who you are? So it's so important. The next piece is to ourselves. And again, there's a quote from the Al-Anon, how Al-Anon works, that I love, that talks about this. It says, "Then we admit to ourselves what our inventory has revealed." In other words, we take responsibility for ourselves. We avoid the temptation to justify our behaviors and attitudes, blame others, or excuse past wrongs. We also avoid giving in to the urge to dismiss our talents and invalidate our character assets. We simply say, "This is who I am." And so it's so important to make sure that we are comfortable in our own skin. And sometimes, I don't think it's very common for people to just be comfortable in their own skin, to just be able to sit and say, "This is who I am. This is not who I am." And that's okay, because we've attached so much. I don't know if it's societal or what, but there's such a strong attachment on, if we admit we aren't something, there's something lacking in us. And we're not everything. There's no human being on this planet who is everything. And so at some point we have to be comfortable with saying, this is who I am and this is who I'm not, and I'm okay with that. So it's getting to that. And then this concept of giving it to another person, which is so important, because I think it really helps drive home the acceptance of being able to tell another person that all the stuff that we wouldn't admit to anybody unless we were kind of put our feet to the fire, so to speak, and have them not run away screaming, not get angry, not tell us we're the worst person they've ever met in their lives, but someone who can say, "Oh yeah, I relate to that. I've had that before. I've done that before. I've felt that way before." It's just the amount of times, and I've sponsored people and I've also been sponsored. I've never had an experience or even heard of an experience where someone has said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that you did that. I never, that's just the worst thing I've ever heard." You're absolutely not forgivable or redeemable from that. So it's really, there's a saying that we're as sick as our secrets. And I think this is really, it's not enough just to admit to your higher power and to yourselves. You have to bridge that gap and that fear of telling someone else. It's so important to our value as a human being that we're able to do that.
Yeah, totally, Catalina. I love that. We're only as sick as our secrets. And as you mentioned, it's just something nice about unloading all this stuff. I mean, as a recovering perfectionist, I just kept all this stuff inside. And oh my gosh, exhausting to carry all that stuff in me, and so afraid to have others know that. And rightly so, because we don't share all this stuff with everyone and their mother.
Nor should we.
No, never. We find a trusted person who we
Right.
can trust to unload that. And, it's interesting because I grew up in the Catholic tradition, never was really too religious, but there was a point in my life where I got really religious, and some of that was good, and some of that I used it almost as a drug to numb out, which I've talked a little bit about in some of the other podcasts. I don't want to belabor that. But I've had a lot of confession in my faith tradition, and there was something nice about sharing that stuff that bothered me, but I needed the other components of it. A lot of times the priests who were listening to me in many cases, were just like, "Okay, you're forgiven, saying Our Father and a Hail Mary." And it's nice. There was something nice about that, but like anything else, it didn't help me from learning where I was getting unstuck. So having a sponsor or someone who could listen to me say, yeah, I get that. I had that too. And this is something that really helped me escape that. And the next time you feel really, really sad, or, you feel like your self-esteem is being threatened, how about trying this? Like learning new ways and new tools to get freedom, so I don't have to keep stepping in the big, ugly puddle, that pothole in the street. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Groundhog Day, and Bill Murray, he lives the same life over and over again. And in many cases, when we're stuck in some of our character defects, that's exactly what's happening. We're living the same patterns over and over again. And some of them, we don't know why we're doing them. And in that movie, beautifully, he has to learn, because he has the same day over and over again. He starts learning to make small changes. And one of them, there's this pothole, and he's so rushing to do what he has to do because he's driven, that he steps in this huge pothole filled with water and splashes his whole leg, and gets his whole leg wet. And like right towards the end of the movie, he's about to step in it again, and he keeps doing this day after day after day. And he's like, and he just jumps to the left, high, and he avoids the pothole. It's kind of like we get to learn through inviting God into our lives, through having a helpful guide. We get to learn new ways so we can get free, and we don't have to keep stepping in those same potholes that we've been stepping in all our lives. So it's one thing to just get forgiven from stepping in those potholes. It's another thing to learn that I'm not evil, that I'm just a human being, and that everybody steps into some pothole. Might not be that one, but into different things. We're all imperfect human beings trying our best. It's another thing to learn, oh my gosh, this keeps happening to me. How can I get free of it so I don't have to keep doing it again? So that part, I find really cool to think about.
Well, and I think it's so great. Back to your example of confession, and that I obviously there are right and wrong things that people do, in my opinion. But I think the root cause is, I can't really think of an example where a root cause is moral. What I mean by that is that deep underlying, like those instincts and stuff that you talked about back in step 4, like the underlying need. Human beings, we don't just do actions to just do them. Like there's always a reason behind it, and there's always a good that we see. Now, whether that's objectively good or not is a different story, but we don't just do things out for no motivation. There's always some sort of deeper motivation there. And I think that I can't think of an example where the deeper motivation is typically that instinct level is something moral. And so I think what's hard is that sometimes when you wrap this step up with religion, is that it's hard to separate these wrongs from being moral, and looking at them as right and wrong, instead of really just trying to look at them objectively and try to understand yourself as a human being. Almost like a computer or a car. Like, okay, if I push this button, this happens. Or if I untwist this nut, this happens. Or if I, hit the gas, this happens, or whatever. It's kind of like that way. Now we have a choice involved. So there's another level at some point where we have choice on how we express things. Like maybe we have deep-seated anger from something that happened when we were a child, but the way we express that anger is choosing not to deal with what happened when we were a child and just scream at everybody that we meet. That's a choice that we're making. But the root cause itself is not moral, in my opinion. And so I think that's one thing that's really great about this step too, is it's trying to take you out of that realm of like just right and wrong, and I'm good or I'm bad, and how many, at the end of the day, I've got the good side and the bad side. How many strikes are on each? Which one wins out? It's not that type of a conversation. It's really trying to understand like what makes you tick, what motivates you to do certain things, what is the, payoff for these certain things, because sometimes a motivation for something is getting relief. That's really common with addiction in general. It's seeking relief at the end of the day. It's seeking relief from pain that's deep seated, and sometimes so deep that without a tremendous amount of effort and digging, you don't even know it's there.
Right.
Yet it's so strong, it motivates you to compulsively do things that you don't want to do. So there's a big piece, and that's why I even think addiction itself is not a moral question. It's like a nervous tick. And I know that sounds really weird, because I know there are some really harmful addictions out there, not just for the person experiencing it, but for collateral damage with other people. But the root of it is not a moral thing. It's not moral. We're not, there's nobody out there who's like, I want to drink and drive and murder people with my car because I'm so drunk. That is not a motivation. There's something else deeper than that. And so again, whether you are an addict or not an addict, there's everybody. If you are breathing the air of this planet, you've got stuff that happened in your life at some time that formed who you are, and maybe not the greatest expressions of instincts that you have as a human being. And so it's learning what are those and how can you change those differently.
Yeah, I love that, Catalina. You mentioned something really beautiful. You said you might not know what they are unless you dig. So that's another cool thing to bring about. I've done many step 5s, and they've all been fantastic, and they keep getting better, which means the more I dig, you can't not do a perfect step 5. You cannot do any of these steps perfectly, in my opinion. Some people throw around like the only step you can work perfectly is step 1. There's some truth to that, but even that, you still can evolve in your understanding of how totally powerless and unmanageable you are left to yourself, and how much power you do actually have, because we have a free will. We're not robots. But I digress a little bit. The digging happens like in the higher power's time. There's a line that says, more will be revealed. God knows what's best for us. Like, let go and trust. The key thing for us is to stay in the game, to keep at it. Like any skill, whether it's playing piano, whether it's driving, whether it's becoming a ballerina, whether it's practicing yoga, whether it's learning tennis, basketball, whatever it happens to be, whether it's learning how to write. We had to learn the ABCs. We had to learn to write small little words. We had to do a sentence, small sentence, a more complicated sentence, a paragraph, an essay. We progress through practice. The most beautiful part of the program is not letting go of the perfectionism, which I believe underlines most of us, especially people who have problems with any addiction, and just part of our humanity. You think about the instincts that we talked about, like there's a perfectionism there, and there's this natural pain and anxiety because we have these instincts, but yet the world doesn't revolve around us. So we're naturally fearful. Like, how are we going to get this security? How am I going to get to be liked? How am I going to get to have a healthy self-esteem? How am I going to get to be seen as a leader? How am I going to get to have someone I found attractive to be my mate? How am I going to have a community of people? How am I going to be popular? Like these natural instincts, which are good, but if we overdo them, it could be problematic. In doing these inventories and sharing this, all the stuff should become a way of life eventually. You go through them once, we never graduate, and you allow God to take you, and more will be revealed by him the more you dig and the more you keep at it. So I definitely don't try to make it perfect. Just have it happen. Invite your higher power into it. Write your inventory. Pray for who you want to pick. Kind of trust and ask your higher power to direct you. Find someone you're attracted to who has experience, has something that you admire. It's a program of attraction, and go through it. You got nothing to lose, and let go of the fear. There's nothing fearful, as Catalina said. Like, every one of us as human beings has made these things. I've listened to a ton of step 5s, and I've given a lot of step 5. I've had a lot of step 4s that I've shared with other sponsors, and none of them, as Catalina said, have said to me like, "Oh my gosh, you are the most evil person." And I want to say, the first sponsor I ever had in a 12-step program, because I had so much guilt and shame and self-hatred, said to me, "You are not an evil person trying to become good and holy. You are a beloved child of God who is infinitely good, but you have a disease, and you need to learn how to heal and get better, because you deserve to be better. You're worth it, and this higher power is madly in love with you. This higher power cares for you deeply. You're good. wow, it was so different than my whatever the hell disease twisted view of morality, Christianity. I was beating myself up from not being perfect. And it wasn't that I was bad. It wasn't that I was evil. I just didn't have the tools, and I had a lot of pain and trauma that had to be unwounded, right? Like the layers of the onion had to be peeled off. So many things that I can see now, I couldn't see when I first got into 12 steps over 12 years ago. And so many things that I could see in year 2 or 3 that I couldn't see in year 1, years 4 or 5 that I couldn't see in year 3, 6 and 7 that I couldn't see in year 5. So the journey continues. It gets deeper and deeper, more beautiful and more beautiful, with the caveat, as long as I stay in it. The more I work it, the more I get. And I don't have to work it perfectly either. So there you go, Catalina.
Yeah, no, there's another quote that I think helps just describe what step 5 is. And it's from Narcotics Anonymous Step Work Guides. And it says, one of the biggest problems we have is telling the difference between our responsibility and the responsibilities of others. We blame ourselves for catastrophes over which we have no control. Conversely, we're often in complete denial about how we have hurt ourselves and others. We over-dramatize minor troubles, and we shrug off major problems that really should be taking a look at. It's just, again, driving home this concept of it, trying to see things as they really are. Because I think that you can look online and there's so many studies of how important it is to say things out loud versus having them in your head. Things just get mixed up. It's hard to tell thoughts apart. I mean, that's literally a tool that really successful people have, is just even saying things out loud to themselves, because the act of having to put things, it's like back when you're a kid, like use your words, like it helps you clarify and understand even to yourself what you actually are feeling, what you're actually thinking and stuff. And so it's so important. And I think, really hovering on, I really hated the word humility before I understood what it meant. I really, really didn't like this idea of having to beat yourself up. And that's like a good thing of like making yourself, like beating yourself down. And that's not what humility is. We talked about it's really just seeing the accurate truth of who I am. And with that can come acceptance of myself for who I really am. But I think it's really important to, because I think for me, humility made me think that you have to be this doormat and you have to just kind of be at the beck and call of whoever else and just kind of, the lowest on the totem pole, like always the last type thing. And that's not what it means. Because if I understand my own dignity, which is part of humility, is understanding what you really are, who you really are, I understand what my dignity is. I understand what is unacceptable to me and what I deserve, and that I'm a good person and that I'm deserving of love and things like that. It actually, I think true humility helps to keep you from accepting unacceptable behavior. Like, I think it actually helps in so many different areas of relationships, because you're only going to accept unacceptable behavior if somehow deep down you think you deserve that, And so I think when you believe that you don't, you see that you don't, you know that you don't, it's helpful. It gives you the courage to say, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't deserve this behavior, and I'm going to put my foot down and, and whatnot. So I think it's really helpful, but it's not from an insecure place. It's not from I don't know. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. I have a quote, but before I share it, going back to something we were talking about a little earlier about practicing these steps, practicing living them, doing the work, being comfortable with whatever happens, trusting the journey, trusting the process, but practice to become a way of life. And you think about step 5, we've done this inventory. Now we're going to share it with someone. We're going to learn to see what's tripping us up. And step 6 and 7, we're going to learn where these shortcomings and traps are so we can ask our higher power to remove them. But once again, even that is not a one-time thing. We're going to learn when we get to step 6 and 7, like something that really is helpful in my own experience is learning to do this, live it on a daily basis, learning to live all of the 12 steps in all our affairs, which is the end of step 12. We talk about that. But when we get to step 10, it's basically a repeat of step 4 and 5, but on a daily basis. So now you've done a big cleanup. But now what are you going to do on a daily basis? Because life happens, baby. You know, things are going to happen. We're going to get resentful. We're going to get fearful. We're going to be tempted to fall back to some of these bad habits. How do we get out of them so we can move forward and really doing like being aware of what's going on, mindfulness, awareness, which we're going to get to. But back to step 5. Here's the quote from Narcotics Anonymous. It's on page 4547. It's Narcotics Anonymous Step Working Guides. 2 things we need to begin working step 5 are courage and a sense of trust in the process of recovery. If we have both these things, we'll be able to work through more specific fears and go through with the admission we need to make in this step. And I think that's important, having courage and a sense of trust. I think we mentioned some other things, not beating ourselves up. Remembering no shame and guilt allowed. That's not what this is about. From the book Paths to Recovery, which is from Al-Anon, on page 55 and 56, here's a quote that I'd like to talk about. It says, "It's important to explore not only the list of events, but also the exact nature of our wrongs. We seek to know ourselves more fully. Therefore, we examine our deeds and the reason for them. Without excusing our behavior, we try to recognize what basic need or fear was operating when we behaved as we did. Taken in context, many of our behaviors made sense at the time. For instance, there are experiences where mistrust was appropriate. We may have been dealing with people and events who are out of control or dangerous. The defenses we learned served us well in alcoholic or other unhealthy situations, but now they keep us from living happily and serenely. We can acknowledge these defenses without condemning ourselves for using them. Our confidant or sponsor is sometimes able to help us understand the exact nature of our wrongs. As we share, we may discover that we need further thought and meditation. In either case, we do the best we can at the time and move on. We discover that we are not alone in our human frailties and that we are not the worst person in the world as we might have believed initially." I like that because I like hearing mistrust can sometimes be seen as a liability, but in certain situations, all these things that were liabilities could have been survival mechanisms, coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms to get us through some difficult times. And that Maya Angelou quote, which I love, and I'm sure I've mentioned in the past, like we did what we did because that's what we knew how to do. As we learn better, we get to do better. And really, it's true for our humanity. No one wants to do poorly. We all want to do really, really well, and we all want happiness, freedom, and joy. So if we're not having that happen, it's because we don't know how to do better, or we haven't been able to implement how to do better. And so the steps help us learn, not perfectly, it's not a Zap Me special, how to get that freedom to kind of think about what's tripping me up and learn new ways. And also give ourselves grace, not take ourselves so seriously, let ourselves off the hook, let others off the hook, be kind to ourselves, learn to love ourselves, and forgive ourselves for some of the things we had to do, and actually pat ourselves on the back. Like if I mistrusted people, if I was around people who were crazy and were not worthy of my trust, that's actually a good thing back then. Today, in a different circumstance and different people who are a little freer and healthier, you know, I don't have to hold on to that mistrust the way I did around people who were very dangerous. So kind of learning that I think is interesting. Your thoughts, Catalina?
No, I think it's great. Like, well said.
As we always do, Catalina, let's close with some 5-step prayers. Here's a couple. Dear God, our higher power, I thank you from the bottom of my heart that I know myself better and that I'm getting to know you better. Help me to continue to become more and more aware of anything that I have admitted discussing with another person that may help me walk in more freedom and experience more freedom. Help me to do what is necessary to continue to make progress. Amen. Second prayer. Dear God, our higher power, my inventory has helped show me more of who I really am. Yet, I ask for your continued help in admitting my wrongs to another person, to myself and to you. Help me, assure me, be with me, guide me, hold me, and continue to have me walk these steps, to live these steps, for without you and this step, I cannot progress in my recovery. With your help, I can do this, and I will do this. Help me to remember the slogan, easy does it, but do it. Help me to keep it simple and to strive for progress, never perfection. Amen. This was great, Catalina. Anything else on step 5 that you feel we haven't hit?
Yeah, I think we did a pretty good, thorough job.
Yep. Well, this is awesome. Looking forward to talking about step 6 and 7 and the rest in our next podcast. Until then, adios.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Serenity is Addictive. Until the next time we meet, keep trudging your road to happy destiny. Peace.